lines. I see.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We are questioning constructs. I'm Rebecca.
What's going on, y'all? I'm John.
All right, John, what do you got for us today? You said you see. Are we playing I Spy with our little
No,
eyes?
I was. Normally, I'm the guy to push the button to start the recording, and you took charge today, and
It's
that's
just what's
cool.
it's what's happening.
It's just how the wind was blowing, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're tired of not taking charge of our day. So
Oh, all right. We're
did
feeling
some
some type of way.
we are. Did some chores, went on a double walk. I
A
got
double
myself
walk.
some ice cream
Okay.
that I'm gonna eat afterwards.
What kind? What flavor?
I went to Cold Stone, so it's sweet cream with brownie and chocolate chip.
I don't know anybody who goes to Cold Stone and has it later. That's such a weird concept to me.
I want to kind of like just veg out and enjoy. And
Okay,
I wasn't gonna do that before the podcast. Like I wanted
fair
to be
enough.
the like the period of the day, like point and a good high note to end the day on.
Well, you speaking about taking a couple walks today, a double walk.
Mm.
A, it sounds like you've had a rough day, which sucks. So sorry about that. But B, the thing that I was even planning on bringing up in the first place was my day at work a couple of days ago.
Tell
Not
me.
necessarily that it was a bad day, but it was a day that led me outside in the middle of the day. And
Ooh, I
I
love
live in
those.
Georgia, and out here in Georgia, I this is my first year living in Georgia. I think we're starting to hit the period in the year where season is finally changing. And so we're going from, really warm heat to something a little milder. And I stepped outside in the middle of the day, and it was like perfect. It was just a perfect day, like a
Yeah.
perfect moment in the day. And I like was walking to my car, and I reflected for a second on, like, dang, just the breeze is hitting just right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good temperature. If you
Mm-hmm.
want heat, you can stand in the sun and warm up a little bit. If you want to be
Mm-hmm.
cool and chilly, you can be in the shade.
Yeah.
Like, it was just the perfect time of day for it. And I walked outside and I smiled. And it's rare that I have opportunities, or not necessarily opportunities, that's probably the wrong word in this instance. It's rare that um, I am just smiling because of the environment. Like, there are very particular times where that may happen for me. Things like being at a convention. When I'm walking the convention floor, something about just being in that space just makes
Mm-hmm.
me smile.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, and when I say conventions, for those of you out there who may have seen a couple of episodes already, may not have, I'm a huge, like, weeb. Love anime, love video games. I'm a nerd, complete. Sure you couldn't tell by my weird anime style glasses, but anyway,
Hold on, pause for just a second. They are
sure,
not weird. They are pretty freaking cool. Who else
you're
do you
right.
know
They're
has
not
glasses?
weird. They're dope.
Yeah.
And
Let's
they
reverse
are pretty
that.
freaking cool.
Awesome glasses. Thank you.
Um, but very, very particular moments in time where I can say that I've walked out and just smiled, just had a smile on my face. Especially because I tend to be a rather depressive kind of person. Like, even like just in my general day to day, I have some, like, really out there thoughts that aren't exactly sunshine and rainbows. And so to just walk out into the sun and just feel good for a moment in time, it was a really interesting thing. when just hit right. And so it kind of leads me to this question of, can you recall, can you point to the last time you were in that place
Mhm.
where it was just like you caught yourself smiling and you didn't realize you were smiling?
I mean, yes, I would say today. I had one of those days
Oh,
today outside. Actually, the last like 2 days. Um,
and here I thought you were having a rough day.
no, 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 no. It
Okay,
was a
okay.
rough day. I
Oh,
was
all right.
I haven't really got sleep last night. I was up at like 3 in the morning, uncomfortable, like in pain, like
Dude,
just
that was my Tuesday.
yeah. Yeah. So,
Weird.
uh yeah, I don't know. So that was how my day started. It was what's interesting, not to get off topic for a second, but
Get off topic. It's cool.
it leads to
What
it though. Like
topic?
build up. Uh I am a very vivid dreamer, and I used to have nightmares since I was a very, very young kid.
Mm.
Very like almost like nightly, right? Multiple times. And writing down my dreams helps, so I haven't they're not as bad, but when I really have one, I'm like, dang, like where did that come from? I must be really stressed out or something. So that was my night last night. So woke up and just like wasn't in a good state. But and I think you know this, but for anyone who doesn't, I've been doing a gratitude practice. I have another YouTube channel where I do 10 daily gratitudes and affirmations. And I started that because I was driving to work one day and I'm like, you know what? I need to change my mentality. And so it started out with just me saying that in the car every morning on repeat. And it really just put me in a good headspace for the rest of the day. So fast forward to now, I usually do it in the mornings, but I do a daily video where I'm literally taking everyone on a walk with me. And so this morning, and I wasn't like physically feeling good too. So I walk out and I can almost pinpoint it too, because it's like I get like 10 steps out of my house and I'm like, nature. Isn't this just great? And so what's funny is because I took a double walk today, when I was doing that in the morning, it was the perfect crisp cool. So you have a jacket, it's not cold, it's not warm. With you wearing the jacket, it's like that perfect reviving fresh temperature. And like 15 minutes into the walk, I'm like, dang, all right, I'm feeling good. Like, we got this. And, we can go through the rest of our day. Fast forward to my second walk after the day, where I'm reviving myself. And it's like a polar opposite. It's beautiful and sunny and like delicious. And I'm just on my jolly good walk. And I'm like, this is nice.
Jolly good walk.
My
A
jolly good
delicious
walk.
walk.
Yeah. There, okay,
You got
nothing gets me more
you
than
have
nature. Like,
you
I
have
would
a
live outside of
really interesting way to
it.
describe these events. I figured you were going to say something along those lines. So
Yeah.
I actually wanted to extend it
Okay.
into a kind of further idea of furthering of the concept and see if there were other places outside of just nature where you may find yourself feeling like this, and not necessarily in places but in times. And the reason I ask is because I feel like this is kind of capitalizing off of our last conversation, our last discussion about intentionality in our world, right?
Mm,
And it really got me thinking about um, not only the intentional but the unintentional. The things that surround us that you would call happenstance. um, and I was thinking about that moment of walking outside, and there was nothing planned about it. It was just happenstance where I found myself and things were just right. And so, again, I find those situations to be kind of interesting in a way, um, because I find myself having to reach for feeling good,
mm,
right? It's very easy to feel neutral or negative. And
mhm,
so just feeling happy or excitable or just pleasure in like a really base sense of
Mhm.
that you may feel going throughout your day is again something that is like I normally am looking to take actions to put myself in that position. It's not
Mm.
something that just happens in like in general. Usually I'm in neutral,
Mhm.
right? So are there any other places for you outside of going on your walks, which you regularly do,
Mhm.
that you find that that kind of that just that pleasantness in the
Mhm.
moment?
Yeah. There's two things that I can think. Actually, well, I have three thoughts on what you said. The first that I'll give you, it's still nature based, but ever since I was a kid, I don't know why, like there's just something about the sun. Like looking at the sun or just like the fact that the sun's there and shining, even if even if my mood doesn't necessarily change, I'm there's just this like joy inside of like, "Oh my gosh, the sun," like, I don't know why. So the sun is one for sure. If I'm like really, really in a dark place, I'm like, "Okay, I gotta at least go outside, even if I don't go anywhere, and just like I don't know why I think just the concept of the sun is just so comforting to me, and it's just always shining or always in the sky. You can always kind of count on it. So that would be one.
What would be the I guess the time or place where you would find it then? Like outside of during the day.
I
Like
mean,
what's
I think
that
I feel the
moment
same
for
way.
you?
Well, I think I feel the same way about the moon, just not as I haven't really thought about that too much because night I'm usually pretty calm. For me, I, I I don't know. Maybe it'll be interesting to see if people resonate with this, but for me, if I'm dealing with depression or going through something, the day is hard, not the night. The closer to evening it gets, the more I'm like, oh, like I can breathe. And I think that goes back to childhood because a lot of stuff would happen during the day and not really at night. Like at night, like no one really bothers you, or at least they didn't bother me. So, regardless of what's going on, I think that that kind of carried forward. So, I don't seek out the sun when the sun's
Wait, but
not up, if
I
that
mean I mean like a almost like a memory. Like
Oh,
i- is there a time like that you can recall that like for you like it hits that moment like the example
yeah.
being like um that moment when I did go on that walk, the moment you went on that walk,
Mhm, mhm.
me walking down the convention floor at an anime
Yeah.
convention, is are there other places in life where you've found those moments?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would say definitely as a kid. Like, anytime that I get super happy about the sun, I think of, um I couldn't even tell you where we were driving, but I was just in the car, and it was nice and sunny, and it was I don't know, just made me happy. So, like, usually that memory comes up.
I feel like the last real time that I felt that I can recall,
Mm,
as an adult anyway, was people. Not everybody has this experience, of course. I was lucky enough to own my own board game shop or be a co-owner. Excuse me. Let me rephrase with two amazing other co-owners. We owned our own shop in California, and another moment for me of just bliss, I guess, would probably be the descriptor that I attach is I occasionally would come in and open up the shop, and Kingdom Hearts is one of my favorite video games. Putting on the town music from Kingdom Hearts 2, Twilight Town's OST, not soundtrack, but the music associated with Twilight Town, putting that on the speakers in the shop, and nobody being in the shop and me just sweeping in the morning until somebody does come in and me welcoming them in and getting like a real video game vibe going in the shop was
Yeah.
just like that was the last time, not the last time, but the most standout moment for me where it's like, man, that was like just a blissful moment, kind of like the walk and the wind hitting just right and hitting
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
perfect point.
There's I would say moments where there's a lot of energy and it feels like I'm like kind of similar to the music, but if you've watched the prior episode, but like I'm kind of like riding the energy. Like there's certain moments, sometimes, energy of like crowds or whatnot can be draining, but there's certain moments where like the aliveness of it just really uh meshes with me and I will feel like that. But something I've said in my gratitude practice is us feeling a certain way, a certain state, you know, depressed or like more what we associate with negative feeling emotions. Where does that start? Thoughts. And so something I started thinking about was if that's a thought, then so is joy, so is happiness, so is the more positive emotions. I bet you the thought is right there. Like it's crazy to think about we could choose to shift and both of those concepts lie like next to each other. So I have done that too before where I've practiced like visualizing stepping into the other thought. Whatever emotion you want to feel. But the other moment, you know what? I think what you're describing comes from how much we're embodying our own authenticity and how much we're actually being true to ourselves.
That's kind of an interesting thought. I think sometimes it can be that for sure. Um, I think these for me are more moments of just happenstance that just things felt right in the moment. There's a term for it in anime, right? It's sakuga, right? It's when the animation hits. It's when the animators just go ballistic and blow their budget on like making things as smooth and as beautiful as possible. It's
Mhm.
sakuga, right? And it's a descriptor for this just feeling. There's no real words to actually ascribe to it. At least I don't think there's one in English that quite fits the way sakuga does in Japanese.
Mhm.
But for me, these are moments of sakuga where it's like the animation just hits, and it's not something intentional. There's no plan behind it. It just happened the right way for it to be stand out in my mind. Like, how many mornings have I been out at that temperature with a similar wind,
Uh-huh.
right? But the wind just didn't hit me quite the way that breeze
The
did.
synchronicity of the
And
moment and
there was just something about the moment that just brings pleasure, brings bliss. So it's hard for me to. I think you can orchestrate it, but I think the moments that I'm referring to are the ones that happen without intention, which is where I kind of like fall back on our last conversation, because it was all about the intention of
mhm.
how we move about the world, the intention of how we interact, right? At least that post credit conversation that we had anyway.
Yeah.
uh, and so this is the exact opposite. It's with no intention that these things happen. And I just find it interesting that, like, oftentimes we will ascribe negative, or maybe it's you and I don't know that this is a general thing, because I don't know that think people think about this on a regular basis, enough so to ascribe feelings to it. But you and I often ascribe feelings to the wishy washy nature of people sometimes, in a negative way, or like the things that just happen as a negative thing, right? Because both of us, I would say, while we like to execute control in different ways, we both appreciate control, right? Um, and so looking at the opposite, something completely out of our control happening that still brings joy, I think I found it interesting
So
because, yeah,
I like I like your thought behind that, and I have a question for you because I mean, I think I've talked about in a prior episode around control and just what I've learned about that with horses. At least I think I did, but
you
uh
have for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So it's just interesting how much control is at play in people's lives and even when we don't realize it, right? So I found it interesting listening to you that I think I would have had a different answer prior to doing the work I've been doing with horseback riding. But it was interesting in taking the fact that things just happen that are out of our control because my thought process when you were saying that is I surrender and I always look for like okay what do I need to learn in this that's not fully healed. And so that kind of goes into my question to you because I then compared it to those beautiful moments of synchronicity where everything just kind of comes together in like a grand way. And I had the same feeling towards that. So I wonder, do you think that those moments, maybe it's not about the fact that we're controlling them, but that we're fully free in those moments? Like it's synced up just enough to where there isn't a need to control and we're just in our the most, I guess, perfect state we could be in.
I think that for me might be, a bridge too far in how I feel about it, because
Hmm.
I think, when I guess we're talking about control in this situation, it's a situation for me where your control,
Hmm.
right, may be in your regular actions, but that's not what's actually contributing to the moment. So it's not necessarily a build up, right? That culminates into something. It's it's the it's like the finding a $5 bill while walking down the street, except on a grander scale,
Hmm.
right? Like
Hmm.
it's that feeling where you could have never guessed. Like, oh, your mustache fell.
I know.
You could have never guessed. I mean, there were many mornings that I went to the shop and opened up and swept before people came in.
Hmm.
Right? Like this is something that happens all the time. It's really, really quite normal, and so there's no practice of it that leads to this moment. It just kind of happens. And I, there's something interesting about the world in the way that, like, things like that can happen, and it's these moments of, you know you can't control whether it rains, but you might be driving and you might be standing outside of your house and you see a double rainbow, and somebody else is taking a video of you going double rainbow, right? And like it goes
I feel called
viral,
out right now.
like like these are moments that not necessarily are planned for, or a culmination of your efforts, but a culmination of the zeros and ones in the world adding up into this just moment, this
Hmm.
moment. So if you were to look at it as a culmination, It's a culmination irregardless of you, and that's so interesting. Like, because the world happens whether we're there or not. That breeze happened whether I chose to sit at my desk during break or I
Mhm.
decided to go get my wallet, which is what
Mhm.
I was doing. I was just walking out to the car to get my wallet during break because I knew I wasn't going to have an opportunity later in the day. And it was just the right place, the right time to feel good.
Mhm.
That's
I
crazy.
What if we have more control over that than we think, though? I agree with you that I think right place, right time, but also one of the things I like to affirm, because I do the gratitudes and affirmations, is miracles are a common occurrence. What if they are supposed to be a common occurrence? What if those moments that you're describing are supposed to be common? What about the people that every day is a good day for them? Like, no matter what happens, but it's like they probably collectively, compared to someone who is not saying that over their day, like, best day ever, they're probably going to get way more of those moments than somebody who goes about their day and says, I hate my day.
Um, Maybe, right? I would grant that for sure. But it almost makes me want to distinguish the feelings that I'm talking about between bliss and happiness,
Hmm.
right? Like, and even when I'm looking at these different types of emotions, right? It's like um you're let me put it this way. The question initially is about the lack of intention leading to something special, right? The You kind of beat me to the second part of this discussion, or the second part of this question was, what would it look like if we were seeking that out?
Mm,
And what if we were intentionally trying to orchestrate it? Um, and why that may look a little different than um, putting intentionality into the world, right? Like, those might be two different avenues that lead to different results. Seeking out bliss and intentionally functioning to achieve a goal, right? And sometimes they align in certain ways, right? Like, I am sure that if your goal is to be a chef, right, you practicing cooking is going to lead to more opportunities of bliss, right?
mhm,
And there's an alignment between that. But if my single goal is not to be a chef, but to find bliss,
mhm,
like, what would the difference in function be? What would it look like? And so that was kind of the next place I was going to go here in terms of the conversation is, you know, what does it look like to chase bliss?
I have an interesting question to throw back at you, but to answer the question you posed, I don't really think it looks that different, because whether you're being intentional about it or not, you don't have control over anything outside of you. And to that point, um, if your goal of intent is bliss, and bliss is experienced internally, w- I just find it interesting that I don't think that's really the first place people look. Like, it's interesting to me that these types of things don't come easy, I think, to most people. And I'm curious, how much do you think is how much does the environment give you bliss, and how much really is just bringing forth what's already there?
I don't know. Not willing to put any confidence level on any of it. But for me, I have a hard time believing that bliss is maybe not a hard time. Um, I think it would be a difficult perspective for me to understand that bliss is something that solely comes through within. I think bliss is a culmination of a bunch of different factors, and they lead to these moments of sakuga. And you can control yourself in a way that allows the opportunity for the zero to flip to a one, right? For that particular feeling, right? But I don't know that it's an emotion that we can call on regularly. I don't know, or I don't think that I believe that it is something that can be directed at whim. I feel like you said something earlier in the first part of our conversation here that was really interesting because it's something that I've said to not only you but multiple people many many times, and I'm sure you're gonna recall as soon as I say it. But how many times have I been like, I think emotions are like kids in a classroom, right? Immediately you recognize it because it's something that I've said previously, right? It's which hand is raised in the classroom, and I'm stealing that from somebody else. I learned that from somebody else on the internet, and I thought it was really interesting, and I thought it was a really clever way of describing emotions and feelings and our opportunity to control ourselves and our opportunity to call upon the child who has their hand raised for anger, who call upon the child who has their hand raised for excitement, happiness, skepticism, et cetera, right? But ultimately, we are our own teachers calling upon those different hands that are raised at any given moment in time. Um, I don't know that I would count bliss amongst one of those hands.
See, I think now this is super fascinating. This is kind of like the music thing, I think, because I'm wondering if our own personal self-image and how we view access and or how we're able to use emotions, how much that plays into what we're able to access. And the reason why I say that is so you're coming at it from a place where bliss is not easy to access or not like readily accessible. I actually, I think, land a little bit on the opposite end of the spectrum only because I've had so many moments with it. But I also know if I want to access it, go outside or um, my my concept of emotions is different than what it used to be as well. But I've been doing a lot of work on myself. I wouldn't say that I could always call it bliss on a whim, but I think that it's pretty easily accessible to me if I wanted to be in that state. One of the things that I started doing 5 to 6 years ago now, maybe, and it started with anxiety. I don't know why this thought came to me one day, but I was just like, I want to use anxiety as a tool. I want to change. I want to see if me telling myself I want to see anxiety as my tool and understand how to use it as a tool, if that's going to change my relationship with anxiety. And what happened when I started doing that is I realized that, oh, anxiety just shows me when I lack confidence in my tool set. So all it is a clear indicator that I either don't have the tool, need to find the tool in my tool set, or I have the tool, but it's not developed enough. And ever since then, my relationship with anxiety and how anxiety presented in my life is so different. And it doesn't really have that same hold. Then the next step I took was with depression. I'm like, if I was able to do this with anxiety and interact with it in that way, I bet you I could do it for with depression too. And so my thing for depression was I want to see depression as a positive thing. Or like show me how depression is a positive and not a negative. and that one came a little quicker, but it's essentially for myself. It led me to know that depression is your full body no. Depression tells you when you are so out of alignment, it's like sending you all the signals. It's like, I tried to tell you, and now we're here, and you must do something about it. And so, in that way, too, I'm like, whenever I start feeling that way, I'm like, got it. Like, this is so not for me. I need to actually take action before this goes any further. And so, same thing with Bliss. While I've only done that with those two. I honestly feel, and it goes back to the thought thing, where I kind of view my emotions as like I'm in this thought bubble with whatever, pick, depression or whatnot. And I bet you it's just one thought away for me to step into, I don't know, happiness or like contentment, like whatever.
Listen,
So,
that right there is a whole crazy like set of understanding that I'm definitely not like. For me, it's out of this world that conceptually that's how you view it.
mm,
um, Not necessarily in a bad way, but just a very different perspective on it. I think there are a couple of big things that stand out to me. One, why not stay in bliss? Bliss is the ultimate feeling. If
mm.
you have access to it at a whim, why ever cry?
Well, I don't think I'd want to stay in bliss all the time. Like, because bliss and joy is like one of my favorite emotions, and that's why I like the sun so much, and just being in joy. But I also recognize if I stayed there all the time, I'd be so burnt out.
What is bliss for you?
Bliss, I oh, that's hard to describe. Like, I know what the feeling, if I had to put it into words, it's like joy with contentment. Like, joy is just like, oh my gosh, sunshine, rainbows. Like, happiness is like, hey, I'm happy, like, nice to see you. Joy is like, I'm living, like, I feel alive. Bliss is like the same as joy, except there's a contentment to it, like a peace or a contentment of like, I am just intaking,
You
I
would
am
associate
receiving.
contentness with bliss.
Huh?
You would associate being content with bliss.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting to me.
If I
That's
had to differentiate between joy and bliss, that's what I would
so
say.
for
Because
me.
contentment doesn't really have those high emotions for me off the bat. Like, contentment is like, cool, like I'm here, I'm chilling, you know, like things are good. But bliss is like a state of like the aha, like joy, and like mesmerizing beauty, but also just, yeah, like contentment. Like, I don't joy comes with like extra energy that I feel like is just being expelled or I want to do something with. Bliss is like you have that, but like you're good to not to just be and observe is the best
So
way I could possibly explain that.
why that's interesting to me is because I interpret bliss as something completely different.
Ooh, tell
Um,
me.
Bliss to me is closer to being orgasmic. It is a
Okay.
state beyond, right, a state of like a pure moment of joy, a pure moment of it's not even content, it transcends that for me. Like
Hmm.
it's like this moment of like, ah, yes,
Mhm. Mhm.
like, yes, this
Uh-huh.
this right. Again, I don't have the words to put it, and that's why like I default to Sakuga, right? I can show you,
Uh-huh.
like, I can show you animated versions of, ah, yes,
Uh-huh.
right, and that may get across like the thought process, but like for me it's something that is like the culmination of this is so spectacular that even if we were working towards it, we couldn't have conceived of what the moment was going to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's that
Yeah.
moment where you're painting and you you know that you're on a good piece. You know
Mhm.
that you got a good piece, and then you step back and you observe, and you're like, wow, what what happened? Like, I've had this. What's another? Um, I feel like I'll tell you a moment of bliss.
Okay.
George, who is a former roommate of mine, really, really amazing, amazing friend. Probably some of the best family anyone could ever ask for. Um, this guy and I went on a journey of sorts in terms of building like a kind of like an art company in a sense. We ended up moving out into a house for ourselves. And one of the things that we did when we first got our CNC machine, right, this large piece that could carve into wood, and this is right when we moved into the house. This is pretty early on to us being in this house together, with the intention of building up an art company. Is we made a sugar skull bookcase, and it was just this, like, it was a bunch of different tasks we were running through, trying to figure out how to make it, because we didn't know how to use the CNC machine. So we were learning and working with each other and testing and messing wood pieces up, and making a mess in the garage, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until we finally made our bookshelf. And it was the first piece that we did that was like, no, like, we weren't pulling from anything in particular. We designed the skulls, we designed the look of it. We figured out all the pieces we wanted to put together, and we knew it was going to come out good once we understood what we were doing, and then we actually put it together. And it was the moment of, holy crap, we did that just now. And look at the result. It's more than what we thought it was. It was a moment that was not just the enjoyment of the fruits of our labor, but it it culminated into something greater than the fruits of our labor. It meant something more that we could never have attributed to. Like, you couldn't have asked us beforehand what this particular dinky bookshelf was going to mean, right? And it wasn't until after the fact where we took a step back that bliss hit, and it was like, ah, yes, this is the moment that this is a moment that will stand out amongst moments.
I'm wondering, oh no, the mustache. I'm wondering if this is like anything else where people experience it on their own spectrum, because it sounds like
I would
part of
imagine so.
bliss for you, satisfaction, I don't think quite encapsulates it, but I think satisfaction is a portion, to be satisfied is a portion of bliss for you. Whereas for me, a high portion of bliss is joy. Like how you described bliss is how I describe joy. So I think this is one of those things where it'd be super fascinating if you polled a bunch of different people. I wonder if they have their own unique experiences with different emotions and you get close, but I'm wondering how different it is
There are
for,
subtle differences. I would agree,
yeah,
because, like, for me, joy, the way you describe joy, is not necessarily how I feel. Joy
yeah.
for me is an umbrella term. It's overarching. It's the thing that extends beyond a moment.
Mhm.
It is a descriptive feeling for an arc of life. It
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
something larger than what could be felt in an individual point in time, right?
Mhm.
Joy is something that you can look back on and say that you have. You can say that you have joy in the moment when you're like observing the time that you've spent in a thing,
Mhm.
which is why being able to have things that make you joyful is so important.
Mhm.
But joy is something that gets attributed to not just your inner place of self, but all that is around you and functions around you,
Mhm.
right? There have been times of joy, there have been times of sadness, and I think sadness is a similar kind of overarching umbrella term where things like happiness and frustration can
Mhm.
exist,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so for you, when you describe joy, that sounds like my happy, right? It sounds like the moment of like sunshine and rainbows and
See, that's
etc.
I think that's interesting because happiness for me is just it's nowhere even near joy. Happiness is like, "Oh, that was cool. Oh, okay. Like that felt nice." But joy for me is like sometimes almost euphoric. And but
Oh
like
yeah, those two words for
yeah,
me, those two words
so
don't go together.
that's so
Euphoric is
crazy.
closer to bliss than
Yeah,
it is
yeah,
joy.
yeah.
Like for
But
me,
oh, no, I have to say this before my brain forgets it. I just had like an aha moment. Like I wonder if the way that we're experiencing this is based on how our nervous system is actually created and set up like per individual. But do you see like what I'm you know how like some people can be more sensitive or sensory than others, or some people might have
sure.
uh, a predisposition to skew one way, or I'm curious if this is not just how we interpret emotions and assign labels to them as we grew up, but I'm wondering if this is also more like neurologically based too.
Yeah, I think there may be something to that. There may, but also like it may this may be where nurture probably comes in pretty heavily, in my opinion, because more than likely what's happening is um, we use our experiences to describe these emotions that have been described to us by other people's experiences. So it's a domino effect, but we can't see the dominoes, right? And so here we are, just the next piece falling in line, trying to describe what the domino art looks like, right? But we can't see it, right? So joy is probably like one of those words that we use in a societal way to mean or ascribe a certain set of feelings. And while we can't pinpoint what that is, everybody has some understanding of what joy is supposed to be,
Mhm.
right? And so we use it to kind of dictate conversation in a sense. I think it's probably more of that nurture and where you fall in society that would dictate like your responses to what you think joy, bliss, excitement, sadness, euphoria, even what would we say uh, depression.
Mhm.
What I found really interesting is that when you use the term depression the for the way that you were speaking of it, when you referenced it as a tool, right?
Mhm.
The immediate thing that I thought of, which I had to quiet down almost, was it was like this rebuttal that came to mind, which sometimes I have to quiet those thoughts because uh, it's not like a back and forth in that sense. Um, but it was depression is sickness, like that was the thought that came to mind, right? Because my experience with depression with my mother, with myself, with other people that I've loved really dearly, has been one of depression not being something that is fully controllable. um, for me, when I speak of depression, like I understand that when I come to the table and I deal with people, I'm oftentimes starting at a negative. And that's not something that I have. There's brain chemistry that I don't have control over. There's there's not really an amount of me waking up and giving myself like a back and forth in the mirror every morning that will change that brain chemistry in a dramatically different way. You can definitely change it to a degree, 1000%. Everything with effort can be affected for sure. But the degree of which you can make that change compared to somebody who starts out with a relatively, right, and I'm using relatively as a really, really strong word here, a relatively normal chemistry, right, or what people would find the ideal chemistry to be, is a lot different, right? Like the scale of control is a lot different, right? Somebody who's heavily depressed, right, and somebody who doesn't have depression but has something sad happen to them, right, are not waking up the next day feeling the same.
Mhm.
It's a sickness.
So I'm going to say something very controversial,
Shoot.
and this comes not only from just my own experiences with the field of psychology, but also the work that I've done on myself, and then further expanding my knowledge and awareness, and or going on my own healing journey. Saying that it's a sickness is part of the problem. So a lot of
I
times,
1000% disagree.
that's why I was saying it was
Yeah.
controversial. However, the more I learn, okay. So what solidified this as well is when I started doing somatic therapy. So part of this is industry based. You tell somebody, you continuously reaffirm something that it's a negative, and that means there's no way out. I'm not saying that um I'm not saying that genetically people cannot have a disposition towards it. It runs on my mom's side of the family. I struggle with it. However, switching my mentality from, oh my God, I'm never going to get out of this, it's a disease, to I'm going to use this as a tool, complete game changer. And a lot of time, like, I am super cautious of what I speak over myself, because that holds such extreme power that I don't think people really realize. Like, our words of speech are our power. And so I don't like saying that it's a disease, because our body is so incredible at healing. And I think we say that, and that limits what we are able to do with ourselves. That doesn't mean that for people who have like severe clinical depression, which is something that runs in my mom's side of the family, and I'm pretty sure not only myself, but quite a few family members struggle with, but it limits how you are able to manage that and keeps you stuck in a cycle. And that's coming
I
both from how I understand, like if you're doing like traditional therapy works, but additionally, what I have learned from my experience and listening to skilled practitioners within somatic therapy as well, and just other modalities in terms of how your body heals.
so I I fall on the opposite side of this argument, but there's something that I want to clarify.
Mm,
I don't think it's a disease, right? Disease implies a certain set of characteristics that I don't think are attributable to depression. Depression is a sickness, 1000%. The same way a cold is a sickness, the same way a flu is a sickness. These are things that can be cured. And one of the messages that I definitely want to make sure is out there is that depression is not something that you cannot overcome,
100% agree.
right? Like, but with that said, one of the things that's going on with this country in particular right now, United States of America, is a really big issue with vitamin D deficiency.
Mm,
It's a really big epidemic that's happening in the United States right now. And one of the things that lack of vitamin D or the deficiency of vitamin D leads to, um, not leads to, but contributes to, is depression, right? And it turns out that just taking this vitamin, right, over a period of time has the ability to improve your situation with it, right? Like the same way if you had a cold and you took cough syrup, right? Like you might feel a little better, or it may shorten the time that you're dealing with the effects of said sickness. The problem is that depression is something that's a little heavier. And so, much like there are varying degrees of sickness, right? A cold may be a couple of days, whereas a flu might be a couple of, weeks,
mhm,
right? Like there are differences there 1000%. Not to say that it's not something that can't be overcome, but there's clearly amongst people different cases of depression,
mm,
different varying degrees of depression. One of the things that I do think about is the fact that depression is something that it is something that we have, that we should learn how to deal with
mhm,
and acknowledge and confront.
mhm.
But I have a feeling that when I say those things, you attribute it to being used as a tool when I use those words to describe it. Um,
Use what words to
like
describe
when I
it?
say confront the depression, when
Mm,
I say acknowledge the depression, et cetera, or acknowledge the things that may contribute to it, right? Like I have a feeling that these may kind of coincide with your thought process when you think about using as a tool
mhm.
within life.
That
Um,
plus your own healing journey,
so
you know?
what I find really interesting about that is that's completely dependent on where you're at, your stage in life, right? So if
Yeah.
you are heavily depressed, right, you don't get the opportunity to think those thoughts on a regular day unless somebody is bringing those thoughts outside to you. Whereas if you are somebody who suffers from depression, but you're not so far gone into the weeds of it.
Mhm,
You're chemically a little
mhm,
more balanced, right?
mhm,
You do have an opportunity to fight. Like I happen to be somebody that, in my opinion, I am pretty depressed, but I do have the ability to affect my depression. Like
mm,
I definitely think that there's probably, well, I've been told that there's medication I should be taking for my depression by medical professionals. I am clinically depressed, but it's manageable, right? This is something where waking up and making my bed in the morning makes a difference in my
mm,
life over the course of weeks.
mhm,
I can notice that. That's something that I can do without pills,
mhm.
right? Or without any medical treatments to improve my situation or scenario. But to say that I don't suffer from depression would be, I think that would be silly.
So, I wanna respond to what you said, and expand a little bit more on why I put such a huge importance and emphasis on words. Um, I'm I do wanna say at first, like, I'm not discrediting the fact that, like, clinical and severe depression exists, like, I also
Okay,
struggle with
good.
this,
Because I
but
was really worried that you were
but
going to say depression doesn't exist.
no,
Go
I
ahead.
no. No,
I was like, no way are we gonna get onto this podcast and
no.
we're gonna say depression is just a tool that you utilize.
Oh,
Like,
no. No, 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 no.
okay, okay,
So,
okay, cool, 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 cool.
but what I you will never hear me refer to it as, and maybe I conflated, maybe I thought you said disease instead of sickness, whatever. But you will never hear me refer to it as a disease or a sickness, or I even try not to say for myself I struggle with this. Why? Our thoughts are our biggest asset and tool. Um if one of the best things I ever did for myself in the journey to utilize depression as a tool and see it differently and actually give myself power back, control, leg up, whatever you want to call it, was I stopped putting any labels to it. If you can't put something that's going to make you feel good about it, don't put a label to it at all. Because right there, I'm telling you, right there,
So
you are putting yourself in an even worse place, even if you don't feel it at the start. So, what I just started doing with depression, when I knew I was in a really, I've been to some really dark places, I would just acknowledge it. I wouldn't put a label to it. I wouldn't, even when I would talk about it to other people, I wouldn't say like, yeah, I'm sick. I like, like I have depression. It just like it doesn't make you feel good about yourself. Like why would you speak that over yourself and make it your truth? It doesn't mean that the depression's not there, but it does, at least that I have um observed, at least for myself, it has a difference in how you're relating to yourself and in those moments where you really don't feel like you have control.
So I agree with you, but the reason that I laugh and I smile here,
Mm,
and it's not to look down on the situation at all. I think you'll find it funny as well. Is that you remind me so much of uh, old school old school dynamics around sickness, in the sense of like my mom was the one who taught me, if you're feeling like you have a cold, don't say that you have a cold, because as soon as you give it a name, once you give it a name, it holds power over you. That's
literally.
that's a very old school magic.
Literally.
It's an old school magic thought process. And what's interesting about it is I think there's some truth to it. So there is a seed of truth in names holding power, and I think acknowledging that you don't feel good, for sure, is one thing.
Mm,
Saying that you are suffering from a thing is a really scary, scary thing that holds power over us in ways that we don't fully understand. I think it's part of like the whole thing with people getting told they have cancer, right? But like when I look at those cases, right, can the cancer patient say that they just don't have cancer, right? So like I think there are levels to it. I think if you are not clinically depressed, but you are depressed, right? I think there's a lot of truth to power to what you're saying, right? Say like you're having a hard time just starting up in life, waking up is getting harder for you, going through your day is getting harder for you, the color seems duller in your world than usual, right? Things like that you can notice, right? I think for you, there's a lot of truth in the idea that, yeah, maybe saying that you have depression probably is not going to help you in this particular scenario, right? Like it may not. I don't know the truth around this. I'm no medical professional, but I think there is a degree, because everything is on a scale. There's a portion of the scale that we cross over at some point. I don't know where it is, whether it's like here at the beginning, whether it's here in the middle, or whether it's all the way towards the end. But there's some part in the scale where I don't know that that is effective, right? Like, um, if you have a twisted ankle, right, and you say, "I'm not gonna say anything about this. My ankle hurts, but I'm gonna just keep moving," right? Eventually, you'll get over the twisted ankle. If you have a broken foot, you probably want to say that you have a broken foot and go see a doctor.
See,
There's a difference.
I think we are talking about two different scales though. I
What do
like
you
that
mean?
you so it sounds like your scale is acknowledgement of what's going on. So putting a name to it and like actually saying, I am depressed or I struggle with depression or um I have the broken ankle, right? And the more severe it is, the more that you can't pretend, if we're going to use pretend that it doesn't exist, right?
Not necessarily pretend. I don't want to use the word pretend, but I
Not acknowledge whatever
the
you want
the
to. Yeah.
the clarification for me is in the degree to which you suffer, right? Because again,
So
I
that's
think
why,
there's a level of suffering that you're not afforded certain thoughts or certain thought processes. Like, of it's not a matter of has this ever been said to you. It's if you don't come across this video, you may never hear these thoughts.
sure. I think that's an entirely different thing though. You only know what you know, right? Or you only know as much as you're willing to consciously digest within yourself.
Which is
But
why if you think you have a problem, you should seek a professional.
that's not what I'm saying though. So like
Okay.
yours is more on acknowledgement of like what's going on. If you're just sad or like, oh, like
If you
life's a
have a
little
cold,
hard, then yeah, then okay, like not really
like
acknowledging it, like it might go away. So like yours is on a scale of like acknowledgement. Mine is on a scale of the more something affects you, the more careful you have to be, especially about words. It's
sure.
not that you're not acknowledging it. This is what I was trying to say is not don't acknowledge it the worse that it gets, right? Like saying to yourself, like putting a label on it. I think, when you're trying to understand yourself and what's going on, that's a natural process. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what you said, I hear repeated a lot over society. Oh, I just have depression, or oh, this is a sickness, or oh, I this is something that cannot be helped. And that puts you into a state of helplessness. And so the more that you kind of repeat those things over yourself, whatever it is, the more that something affects you, the more careful you have to be to door guard for yourself. It's just like if, for example, someone who doesn't have an addictive personality, they can potentially smoke cigarettes once or twice and be fine. There are those types of people out, or smoke a pack and then they quit cold turkey. More likely, someone's going to get addicted to it or need it, right? And then eventually, or maybe alcohol would have been a better one for this,
It's
but
actually really interesting that you're pointing to alcohol because that's what I was going to bring up as something that might be a little more analogous to what you're speaking to. But it's interesting that, like, so um, I interrupted you. Go ahead, finish your thought on alcohol, and I'll
yeah.
jump in.
So, okay, so let's transition to alcohol. You have people that can drink one or two drinks, don't care, whatever. Then there's the person that unfortunately it takes over their life and now they have to be super careful. They probably can't have a drink at a party because it's not a drink to them. So what I'm saying is be a very cautious door guard and do what is in your power. So for example, if I was on the other end of that spectrum, we hear people a lot say, like, well, I'm an alcoholic or I'm a recovering alcoholic. And while that's not wrong, if based on the experiences that I've had in my life in terms of reflection of speech and thoughts and how those two are meshed and what happens when I speak or think something over myself, whether that's true or not, I would try and stay away from that. And I would instead either make a different term or focus on the action of what I'm going to do instead. Like, you know, I'm just a person that this is a very poor example because I'm not really an alcoholic, but just trying to give context. I'd probably say something instead like, I'm just a person that walks by stores with alcohol. Like, where you put your emphasis is what's going to have control over you. And some of it can't be helped, right? But the portion of it that can, like, I've even, just to give another personal life example, like, I've even stopped making jokes about myself that at one point in my life when I was younger would think it funny, but actually maybe weren't the nicest jokes for how I want to be treated as a person. It kind of takes that context. So like just my point is be very careful of the words and the thoughts that you're thinking to yourself, especially if you really struggle with something like that.
So I think what you're saying is important. I think the distinction I want to make is that these are two different things. I would say how you confront yourself,
Mm,
or how you decide to go about treating your depression is one thing,
mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But I don't think there is danger in acknowledging what something is. I think alcoholism is a really interesting relation or analogy here. The reason why is because alcohol is something that's a choice at the beginning. Sure, right? You
Mm,
can choose to drink.
mm,
Over a period of time, it starts to become a something that you become dependent on. Um, what actually happens is your brain develops a chemical dependency on the thing, so that walking by an alcohol store or going to a party isn't just that,
mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Now, that's not a statement to take power away from people, right? That's a statement encouraging people to be cognizant of the power that they have, right? And understand what the reality is, right? Because somebody who is an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, probably will tell you, hey, no, there's a chemical reaction
Mhm.
happening in my brain. I can't turn off chemicals, right?
Mhm.
But they do have power to say, I am just a man who's walking by a store that happens to
Right.
say sell
Right.
alcohol. Those are two different things, though, right? Those are two very separate concepts. And I want to be very particular about this because I think it's really important to understand for anybody else out there who's listening. I think you understand it inherently, right?
Mhm.
But for the people who don't have an understanding, who may be suffering with this thing and are wondering, why can't I just wake up and do that? Why can't I just do what she's saying? Why can't I wake up and just say I'm going to control this thing and it's a tool and it's
Mm,
XYZ? Because there are people who are like that, me being one of them, right? You and I have had plenty of discussions that have sounded very hopeless,
mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, the realistic truth is that I have control over my thoughts to a very strong degree, more so
Mhm.
than what other people experience,
Mhm.
but I have some control over that for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
It does not take away from the fact that I have some type of chemical imbalance that should be addressed,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
acknowledging that I do have that and I should seek help in some kind of way is not the same as saying that this is a hopeless situation that can't be recovered from.
Mhm.
It's acknowledging the fact that I am now taking steps to recover from it,
Mhm.
right? And I think there's a really big difference between the two.
I think we're on the same page.
Okay, cool.
Following um Yeah, following your thought about how, you were saying that you have a better degree of control over your thoughts. My
Yes.
whole thing about the whole emphasis with the words, we are not using our words to pretend that something's not going on, right?
Mm,
What I am saying though is, even like, and the goal also is just not to control the thing. It Even for me, I'm not at a point where I can be like, depression be gone, right?
yeah,
It's it's more so every little ounce of power, every tool that you could possibly use at your disposal to make the moment easier for you is in your best interest. And so
I agree with that. Yes.
part part of what is in your power, it doesn't mean that you do these steps and you might not feel shitty. If it does, great, that's awesome. Sometimes it doesn't work, but
It's the
doing this,
practice of the thing.
it's the practice, and it's you being on your own side. You
Agreed.
don't need to tell yourself that you have a disease or a sickness and you have depression. Like, great, you know that. But what you can do is just go, I'm just going to sit with this. If that's too hard, just say, I'm just not going to think a thought. All those little things mean that it's not just you combating depression and yourself, it's just you against the depression, not you against the depression and your thoughts also against you.
So there's something interesting there that, like, for me, even the verbiage there is something that, like, I find it interesting how we view, because I think we have similar feelings, but
Mhm.
we ascribe them very differently. Like, for me, it's not me against my depression, because my depression is not something that is an outside force that's being placed upon me, right? My depression is something that I have a relationship with. It is something that it's not about um, controlling it.
Mm.
It's about growing to understand myself, and about growing to understand how I can function despite it, right? Or in spite of, not in spite of it, I would say despite it. It's learning how to work around this thing, because it is a thing that's part of me. It is
Mhm.
it like the it is not something that just disappears, right? It's something that you have to work with, right? And that's why it's important to understand, at what point you do need to seek medical assistance, because at the end of the day, right, you need to develop or garner the tools
Mhm.
to work with the thing that is part of you, right? Which is why people who don't have clinical depression can experience depression, because
Mhm.
depression is part of us. It is a thing that I think is within us. It's not an outside force being placed on us, right?
When I say it though, I don't consider it's not an outside force, it's internal.
I That's
It's
100%.
but the
That's why for me it could never be me against my depression. I'm not fighting against my depression.
See, that maybe I should have just I don't know, maybe like anything
That's
it's
why I'm
different.
saying I think we're on the same page, but we use
Probably,
really different terms to ascribe our feelings.
or it could just be a different experience. So for me, what it feels like is I'm in a
100%. Yeah.
literal, like, not that I don't accept it, but there is like a me versus my depression internally.
See, I think
And
different
so,
people have different
yeah.
understandings of what that, like. This is really interesting,
So I
and
should have led with that. Right. Yeah.
it's gonna relate to our music conversation. Actually, funny
Yeah.
enough, we're gonna full circle back to that. Um, what is your visual representation of depression, if you had to give one?
Oh, um, oof. Yeah, that really depends on how deep in the hole I am. I would say it's it feels like an internal separation of self. So it really does feel like a divide within me. And it feels very dense, dark. Um, it's almost like portion of me isn't affected and the other portion is. Um, and I just feels heavy and I feel unwell, I guess.
So I have a very visual depiction of what depression is to me,
Hmm.
because I've put a lot of time and thought into, well, a variety of different things. This included, but this has been a constant in my life. I think since I was a very young child. Um, for me, what depression visually is a cyclone. It's a
Interesting.
tornado, and that's something that I've actually had conversations with you in the
Uh-huh.
past about.
Yeah.
Is this constant tornado going on? And so some days I wake up and I am far away from the tornado, and I feel the light breeze of it, right? But sometimes I'm right on the precipice of it and I feel every pull and every tug in every direction. And it feels like something that just wants to suck me in to the center and never let me go. Um,
That's
but
so interesting.
but for me it's a distance from the tornado that is pulling inward. For other family members, you may find this interesting as well, and I've also like talked to you about this.
Uh-huh.
For other family members, they feel as though they're on a beach, and some days they're standing with their toes in the water, on the beach itself, and some days they're underwater and just sinking.
What?
But these are the different, like, that's not my visual representation. That's not how I feel about depression. That person who I'm speaking about has really like, you know how a doctor
Yeah.
may ascribe you like two pills.
Uh.
They ascribe them like three times as much. Like, it's ridiculous.
Well,
But
but that just makes me really wonder because I've never asked anybody else how they visualize it. Because for me, it literally feels like I'm split in half, and it feels so uncomfortable. And like it literally is like I recognize that it's still me, right? And I don't feel like I'm like, against it, but it's like half of myself is in it. The tornado sounds way worse because it
right,
doesn't even seem like a concept of self at that point. And I think it's interesting too. Your music representation was of a strong tree where you get to choose if you go with the wind or not.
yeah.
But that's wild to me.
Actually, wow, what a connection there.
That's
Yeah. That is kind of wild to think
so
about.
wild.
Why would I do that? That's wild.
Like in one
Oh
hand, you were
man.
so
The
like
tree in the
stoically a
wind.
tree and rooted
Yeah.
in, and on the other, you're just whipping about. Like there is no tree. It's just
Well,
mayhem.
it's completely pulled out. Like, again, it just depends on
Right. How
the
close you are.
day,
Yeah.
right? Like, again, some days I'm far away from the cyclone, and I can function as if there's the lightest breeze,
Let me
right?
ask you, where do you feel in your body?
Oh, I don't know that I can attribute that. I'm not.
Really?
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is something where I think this just happens to be a really big difference in our journeys in
Uh,
terms of our self thought and mediation of self.
uh,
Um, I think that you have a very physical mediation of self
mm,
that you utilize on a regular basis,
mm,
right? I do not. Like, I do not have the feeling, like, when you talk to me about how your body feels about these experiences, it's
uh-huh.
alien to me because I just don't feel those things those ways. And this is a conversation we've never had. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's completely different for me. Like, I just don't have those experiences whatsoever. So when you talk about how your body feels when this energy and this pressure just leaves your right arm, and
Yeah.
your right shoulder
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just feeling so much more loose,
Yeah.
and Yeah, I don't experience the world in a similar way.
So let me ask you, I have two things that are this is so fascinating to me. Um, do you feel music in your body when you're listening to music?
No, I actually found that really interesting when we were having our discussion. Is that you said something to the liking of that,
Uh-huh.
and it was just a moment for me where I was like, that's kind of weird. Not weird like weird,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
weird
yeah.
like different. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of just different. Like the idea that like you're not that you can't feel music, because even I can feel music,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's not something that like say starts in my legs and
Uh-huh.
moves up.
Yeah.
No, it's something that reverberates all the way through me. It's something that, generally speaking, it is everything feels the thing. And I think this is a question of how in touch and or in tune we are with
Uh-huh.
our bodies. And
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't like being touched. I don't like people being around me. I'm not the guy who's going to go give you a hug. I feel weird about handshakes. You might get a fist bump.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't like physical contact, right? Like I'm just not in tune with my body in such a way that I think I could describe some of the feelings that you're able to.
So, and I this is such a fascinating conversation to me. One, I do think that I have been physically more sensoritory since I was a kid.
Mm,
That probably plays into it. But the other piece is I've been doing somatic therapy now for 2 years. And I want to touch on this and then yeah, this might be really interesting, but this was the most helpful tool I have ever come across. For anyone who doesn't know, somatic therapy is different than talk therapy. And talk therapy is just your traditional therapy. You go, you see somebody, there's a variety of different areas of expertise. You know, there's family systems, there's um, oh my goodness, behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, just to name two. So, anyone, I just say talk therapy as an umbrella for traditional therapy. You're going to someone, you're speaking about the thing. Somatic therapy is all about the body. And I will preface this by saying if I had to do it all over again, because I've done both my entire life, or I did talk therapy for a majority of my life and somatic therapy recently, I am always going to advocate for somatic therapy. However, be prepared to actually do work with somatic therapy because in talk therapy, what happens is you can talk about a lot of stuff over many years and still not get anywhere because it's all based on when you're ready to do the work. And we're very good about talking about things and thinking that we're going somewhere, and we're really not. Somatic therapy is all about the body. So there's a really good book, The Body Keeps the Score, which talks about using scientific studies how they've proven that, you know, traumatic situations, your body stores up all the energy, which is also why you hear about generational trauma being a thing stored in people as well, because DNA and everything else, like we are carrying other traumas, I guess, that didn't get resolved. So what somatic therapy is you start out the session and, you know, the person I see, she goes, well, what's up? And I'm like, oh, well, uh, I don't know, like something with my family. And she goes, okay, where do you feel that in the body? Is there a color? Um, what do you get any images? Do any I get a lot of like thoughts that pop up. There's a lot of color associated. Sometimes there's not for people. Sometimes it's like I can't feel my body. I didn't realize that the at my waist down that I've just been in a freeze state this entire time. A lot of times for the first like year and a half when I went to this therapy, um I'd sit there. I knew everything that was going on within my top body, and I almost never could feel my legs. It's like they didn't exist. And I was like, that's interesting. So it's about bringing awareness to how your body is storing the trauma, what it feels like, getting reacquainted with your body. And so that's why you cannot run from yourself in that therapy. And that's why I say, trigger warning, like be prepared to do the work if you do it, but look into it. Um, because one of the things I think would be interesting relating it back to you, John, is I think it's wild. that you don't have a lot of body awareness. That's not negative or positive, but I'm wondering if you were to become more aware of your body, if your visual representation of your depression would actually change. Like, would it still be a tornado? Would it actually morph more into a person? Or because the thing that's similar between mine and the other persons you shared is there's still a person in it. Yours is a tornado that I think you said you're getting sucked into. So I think that would be interesting.
Well, there's a person in mind too, right?
Oh,
Like
there is. Okay.
the same way. Yeah, it's just the question of where that person is in relation to the tornado,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not like I think for mine as well as the example that I gave, it's not somebody else or it's not another like it's not another. Um, it's hard to explain because we're kind of like getting into the weeds of it.
Mm,
Um, in both situations, we're talking or we visualize ourselves.
mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
what I would say,
Okay.
right? But
Gotcha.
it's only just ourselves there, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, they're underwater. Sometimes I'm um, at the center of the storm,
Mm,
um, which is really interesting for me because sometimes it'll be such destruction being wrought around me, but I'm at an odd peace with it,
mm-hmm.
which is also why this analogy really works for me. Because the eye at the center of the storm
Mm,
is that.
mm-hmm.
Um, but better to not be in the storm at all.
Mm,
So I don't know. It's just we all kind of feel. I think if you were to ask, and this is probably a good question for you guys out there, is if you experience depression, and even if you don't experience depression, if you experience happiness and elation, which I hope every single one of you do, if you are experiencing joy, if you're fortunate enough to recognize that you are in joy, if you're fortunate enough to recognize that you're in bliss, my question for all of you guys is, what does that look like to you? What's
mm,
your visual representation of these strong feelings that hopefully we all have an opportunity to experience because it's truly the spice of life.
mm-hmm.
What do you visualize?
And I think my question, because, and hopefully, I think we did the topic for this short amount of time justice and gave people something to think about that, maybe it helps you to interact with yourself differently, like depression's real. Clinical depression is a beast to reckon with. Um, and so I want to hear from people, what are tools that you have found that help you, that I guess help you strengthen yourself to go through those moments? That's my question.
I think I think this is good stuff, and for
Mm,
those of you out there, just uh, be present, and
mhm.
when you're looking at topics or questions like this, just really keep in mind and always try to remember to dive, you know,
Head first, face
head
down.
first and face down. Thank you guys for joining us. Keep asking questions, y'all.
Yeah.
This is John. I'm out.
See you guys. Bye.